welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we would be learning about CSS animations, and in the process we'll be building an animation that looks like a ripple, which is this blue stuff here. Some websites use this to draw the attention of their users to a particular section of their website. There are so many ways you can apply CSS animations to your website, and we'll be going right in. The first thing you need to learn about CSS animations is the building blocks, and there are two major things, which are the keyframes and the animation properties. Now, these are the animation properties, and in bold we have their default values. The first one is the animation name, followed by the duration, which means how long you want your animation to last, the timing function, the delay property, which means do you want the animation to start immediately your website loads, or do you want it to delay for some seconds before it starts. Then you have the iteration count, how many times do you want the animation to be repeated. Then we have the direction, the fill mode, play state, and timeline. All we need is just two files, the HTML file and the CSS file. Now in the HTML file, what we have is a simple button that just says register, which is supposed to take the user to the registration page. And here for the CSS, we have some styles for the nav element, we have some styles for the register container, which will be containing the button element and the button notch that we'll be creating in this tutorial. Going back to the HTML element, we are going to be adding another element, which is the button nudge element, and we're just going to give it a class of button nudge. So we'll copy this class name, go to the CSS file and start styling it. First thing, we want to have like a base style for our nudge element. We want to be able to say this is what our nudge element needs to look like. It's going to be a circle and it's going to have a color of blue. So we'll start by giving it a width of 18px, a height of the same thing, 18px, and a border radius of 50%. This is how to create a circle in CSS. So we'll give it a background color of blue, else we'll not be able to see the element on our browser. Here is the element visible on the browser at the moment. Let's increase the size of our browser, and then I would like to add a border to our register container so that we can visualize the positions or the places where we are placing the nudge element. So we'll say border, we'll give it a color of orange. We're going to take this out at the end of this tutorial. We'll give it a border width of 1px and a style of solid. So here we are, but we do not like the both of them touching, the nudge element and the register button touching each other. So we can say, rather than having a justify content of flex end, you can just comment this out for now and use space between instead. Yeah, so we have our base element. The next thing we'll be doing is to make use of CSS pseudo elements to add two elements which would be used to design the animator, just like we have on the original design. We can see that there is something at the center which is almost completely full colored, and then we have the one outer. Let me zoom this so we can see clearly. I'm going to refresh this again. Yeah, so we have the inner ripple, which is kind of darker in color, and then we have the outer nipple, which is kind of fading out. And after about 10 seconds, everything disappears. So we are going to be using two elements, which are pseudo elements, to design this. We'll copy the name of the button, which is the elements that we want to design for, and we'll use the double colon. We'll say before pseudo element. We'll open rules for this. Then we'll have the same thing for the after pseudo element. Now going back to the browser, we want to check out what we have so far. We have just one element showing up, which is the main button nudge element here. But like I said earlier, we'll be adding the before and the after pseudo elements from CSS. So we want to maintain the same dimensions as the button nudge, the main element. We want to have the same background color. So we'll just copy this here. For us to see the pseudo elements, we'll have to use the content property, which is very important. If not, we will not see anything. We use the content property for the both of them. Towards the end of this tutorial, we're going to be combining any repeated CSS rules. Then we'll be using a display of say block. And let's add some things in the content. Let's say this is before, so we'll have a B here. This is after, we'll have an A here. If you notice, the before, of course, on the view, it comes before the after, obviously. And here we can then make this background color to be transparent. And we'll still have our two pseudo elements. Now we'll give the border radius also. Next thing is to add the animations, and we'll be starting with defining the keyframe. So the keyframe is just a list of CSS rules that would use to define how the animation will be progressed on the element. So we'll start with the add keyframe, and then the name or the identifier of the keyframe. In this case, we want to first define the keyframe for the before pseudo element. So we'll say before repo or whatever name you feel is better. Then we would have for the after as well. For CSS to know what animation keyframe to apply to what element, you have to give the animation name for that element to be the keyframe name. So we'll start with the before, and we'll say animation name to be this. Next, we want to define how long the animation is going to last. Before we define how long the animation will last, let's say what will be happening from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation. So if the animation is going to be lasting 2 whole seconds, we want to say what will happen once it starts at 0 seconds and what will happen at the end, which is at exactly 2 seconds. For us to define that, we'll say the from to be something and the to be something. We can also make use of 0% here and 100% here. So 0% when the animation starts, 100% when the animation starts. We can also add 50% to say what happens at the middle of the animation process. And for the first element, we want to say, so remember what we are aiming for. Let's go back to the browser, refresh this. Can you see that the before element is the one we have at the center? The size does not increase. The after element is the one we have on the outer part, which is increasing in size. So what we want to do here for the before ripple is to say that we want to start with an opacity of 0 and we want to end with an opacity of, let's say, 0.8. We'll do something similar for the after ripple, but we'll be starting with an opacity of 1 because we want it to appear and disappear in the process. We'll be ending with an opacity of 0, which just means we don't want to see the element. Then we also want to scale it using the transform property. We'll be scaling it to a size of 1.8, which means increasing the size to an additional 80% of the original size. Now going back to the before element, which we have here, we have added the animation name. We want to add the animation duration, which is very important, and we want to say the animation should last for 2 seconds. Now we can see that something is already happening. I'm going to make the opacity of the after pseudo element to be 0 so that we just kind of hide it for now. So we have only the before element. So like we already defined, we say that at the beginning of the animation the opacity should be 0 and at the end the opacity should be 0.8. I'm going to refresh this and we'll see that. Now because we want the element to disappear after the animation has lasted, we'll also be giving it an opacity of 0. So we'll copy from what we have at the after, place it here, and once the animation is done, it's going to disappear completely. I'll just take that up to separate it from the animation properties. The next animation property we want to add is the animation timing function. And by default, like we said earlier, the value is, but we want to make use of linear. The difference between is and linear is that if you make use of is, the animation will start up slowly and end faster. But if you say linear, you're saying you want the animation to progress at the same rate. You want it to start and end at the same rate. Next, we want to add animation delay, and we want to say that it will be 1 second. So once the page loads, we do not want the animation to start until after 1 second. Now there's many reasons you may want to do this. You may want to do it because you don't want the user to see the animation immediately the page loads, so that the user does not confuse it with the other elements on your page. So let's go back to the browser and refresh this. Observe the animation is going to start after 1 second and is going to last for 2 seconds. So we will be adding the next thing, which is the iteration count. The default value for the iteration count is 0, and there are actually other properties you can use. You can say infinite if you want the animation to last forever. You just want it to keep repeating. What did we do here? So I'm just going to take this out. So you want the animation to repeat endlessly. You use animation iteration count of infinite. So these 4 animation properties are what you mostly be using in your animation property definitions. What we'll have is that the whole animation is going to last for 11 seconds. It starts with a delay of 1 second. So if you're not counting the delay, then it's lasting for 10 seconds, because the first time it's 2 seconds and then it is repeated 5 times, which makes it 10 seconds altogether. Now that we are done with this, I would like us to combine all these animation properties into one line because that is very possible. And in the process of doing that, I want you to take note of something. Always specify the animation duration before you specify the animation delay so that CSS does not confuse the both of them and think you mean the other when you mean one. So let's go. We'll start with just saying animation, and the first thing is the animation name, which is like the keyframe name. So we'll copy this here, give a space. The next is the duration. After that, we have the timing function. After that, we have the delay, and then we have the iteration count, which, like I said earlier, can be infinite or any other value. And with all this in one line, we can take out these definitions at the top, and we'll definitely still have the same animation showing up on our browser. Next, we'll do something similar for the after pseudo element. So we'll just copy this, add it here, and change the name to after repo. And I'm just going to comment this out for the before pseudo element, and let's just see what happens with the after pseudo element. I'm going to come back here, refresh this, and we'll see that it's actually increasing in size and fading out at the same time, and that's what we specified here in this keyframe. I'm going to add the before repo back. Now going back to the end product we had initially, we want to be able to stack the elements on top of each other so that they can look like this. And for us to do that, we'll be using CSS position. So first we'll come over to the main element, add a position of absolute. We are going to be taking out the justify content space between, which we added earlier. Change this to flex end, and we want to move the position of the nudge element to the top left corner. So we'd say left to be 0, right, not right, top to be 0 as well. We'll do the same for the pseudo element. Before we do that, I'd like to combine the common styles for the pseudo element. So we'll be having this, we'll be adding the after pseudo element. Take this off and say after, and we'll just close the bracket. Now let's look out for the common properties. We have this as common. The content, we are going to change it to be an empty string. So take this off, do the same for the after, take this off, and we'll be adding position of absolute, top left 0 for the pseudo element as well. This animation name, taking it away because we already have animation definitions in the before and after pseudo elements. So yes, we'll take out this display of block, and then we are going to add bottom position of 0. We'll add right position of 0 as well. Now look at that, we have our pseudo elements stacked on top of each other. let's give some space from the top and the left side of the parent element. So here we would have 5px. For the top we would also have 5px, just to give it some space. And what else do we do? Maybe we can reduce the scale of the after element. Now we have achieved something very similar to what we had initially, which is this. I'm going to refresh this again. Let's see. Refresh what we have. Yeah, I think we're almost done here. So now we'll be taking out the border we added to the register container, which is this. And be taking out this comment. And that is it. I'm just going to reduce the scale of the browser and refresh this. This is what the nav element looks like, and I believe this will draw the user's attention to the register button. If you'd like to learn more about CSS animation, you can visit this documentation by MDN. Just go to your browser and type MDN CSS animation and you should be able to get to this website. Thank you so much for staying to the end and see you next time. Bye.